Welcome to Born to be a Sports Agent. I am here with Seth and Ricky, and we're going to talk about basically the College Sports Commission. And the title of this podcast, which is quite interesting, Be Skeptical but Not Cynical of the College Sports Commission, because I think there's a lot of cynics out there, guys. So why don't you tell me, what is the College Sports Commission? What is it?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you having us on the podcast to be able to discuss this topic, and we also think it's quite interesting. And I think part of the reason that this is so interesting is because it's brand new. The College Sports Commission was created on July 1st of 2025, and so as of the date of recording, the College Sports Commission is only 5 weeks old. And so it's a very brand new governing body, and I guess that kind of is into our first point, which what is the CSC, which is the short for the College Sport Commission. And it is a self-created governing agency. The CSC was created by the Power 5, who are now the Power 4, but the major conference players. It is a for-profit organization that has been set up to police the rules that have come out of the House settlement.
Interesting that it's for-profit, Seth.
It is very interesting that it's for profit, and it's also interesting that it's basically been something that's been opted into, and the enforceability of the CSC's rulings are basically their enforceability comes from a handshake deal amongst the 4 or 5 commissioners who have overseen the forming of it. And it's interesting, just recently at the SEC Media Day, Lane Kiffin, the Ole Miss coach, already had an offhanded comment about he didn't see likely that the CSCs would have much authority as soon as they crossed one of the major, SEC programs or something like that. So the long-term viability and strength of the CSC is yet to be determined, but it is, and it operates, I think, another point here is it operates outside the bounds of the NCAA. I don't think the NCAA wanted to use their sort of enforcement wing to then themselves enforce the terms of the House settlement.
Why do you think that was?
I think that it's messy, and I think that this is more speculation than anything, but I think the NCAA is already, with the NIL, and the NCAA has been shaken and turned upside down, and I think to then have to enforce some of these issues is only going to probably continue to erode their power the same way, for the same reason that the CSC potentially is going to have issues. I think if the NCAA was going to enforce, some NIL payment to a star quarterback on an SEC program and try and, rule somebody ineligible or something like that, I think that's only going to continue to erode the NCAA's power versus now it's this other branch and, it's somebody else to fall on the sword, basically.
Yes,
so.
And I think there's going to be litigation. I personally think there's going to be litigation, but keep going. So
the CSC is overseen, I think this is interesting, by the CEO is Bryan Seeley, who was hired from Major League Baseball. And I think it's his background is helpful to kind of understand what the mission statement is of the CSC. And his background is actually as a prosecutor.
Oh, interesting.
And as a very successful federal prosecutor, he has on his CV as a time as a federal prosecutor bringing down the largest domestic bribery ring in which a number of contractors were bribing members of the Homeland Security to secure different contracts and stuff like that, and he was one of the prosecutors that was on that case. So he really made a name for that, and that was a very long, detailed, and drawn-out investigation. And I think that really kind of speaks to who he is as a professional. I think that the attention to detail and pulling on a string until he was part of unraveling a whole, again, the largest domestic bribery ring in the United States. He then went from federal prosecutor's office to Major League Baseball, where he was head of their enforcement wing. And at the time that he came in, Major League Baseball had a lot of stuff that needed to be cleaned up with some domestic violence issues that were kind of some repeating things, and then he dealt with the Astros and the trash can scandal, and I think the perception of baseball in the 10 years that he's been there with dealing with some of their enforcement things, some PED issues, generally people felt like he really cleaned things up, and so he's now left baseball, and he started at the CSC on July 1, 2025.
Okay, so what is the CSC gonna review? And are they gonna review all the NIL activities?
So the CSC is going to oversee basically all of the activities, but not as themselves. They've set up this thing called NIL Go, which will
Right.
ultimately determine if the schools are breaking any rules, and then determine the appropriate punishments to those who are breaking the rules. So all third-party NIL deals that are worth more than $600 will be processed and approved by NIL Go, which is a clearinghouse run by Deloitte, which is a large consulting firm. And clearinghouses usually are financial institutions that play important roles in things like this to make sure there's smooth operations of the various markets involved, specifically facilitating these types of transactions.
So Ricky, what's gonna happen if they decide that an NIL deal is not valid? What's gonna happen then?
The way that they evaluate it will lead to a deal either being cleared, which means it's compliant and good to proceed.
And when is it gonna be cleared? Do we have any idea? What is gonna clear and what's not?
So usually if it's not clear, that means it failed one or more of the criteria. And
what are those
athletes,
criteria?
the criteria has to basically be a deal in which it's marketable. It has a valid business purpose, I believe.
Right,
is the
that's the word,
Yeah.
valid business purpose.
Yeah.
What's a valid business purpose?
The valid business purpose could be, for example, anything that's not pay for play. So the goal is to determine whether the payer is too close to the deal or the school. An example of an appropriate deal would be someone paying, or like a collective paying an athlete to wear a t-shirt to market that t-shirt. And so if they have valid business purposes or some type of plan to make a profit for that product, then that would be considered a valid business purpose.
What if the product doesn't make profit and they're paying $1 million to wear the shirt? Is that a valid business purpose or not?
They'll review it. They as in the NIL Go and CSC, will review it. They have an analysis process that they're utilizing.
The main issue, I think, with the example that you just gave is
Yeah.
the fair market value. So that is in something has to have a valid business person, but it also has to have a fair market value. And so I think paying somebody $1 million to wear a t-shirt is most likely not fair market value unless, arguably we're talking about mainly about college football in SEC, Big Ten football. So maybe Arch Manning, it's fair market value to pay him $1 million to wear a t-shirt on, maybe some sort of media hit that he's going to do to promote Texas football. But I think for most of the other people, it's not going to be fair market value, and then that's going to be dinged, by the CSC.
So once it's dinged, then what happens?
The athletes actually have a chance to revise or reapply these deals, so they can just altogether cancel and get a refund for whatever deals are taking place. Basically, they can appeal it.
They can appeal it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the CSC has there are some deadlines here too that are very important. So you have 15 days after having an NIL deal denied by the CSC. You have 15 days to file an appeal. And the appeal is a very simple one-page form that's on their website.
Okay.
It's almost like a Google Doc at this point. And you submit the form. At that point, then you're set to go to an arbitration process.
Okay.
Actually, CSC has contracted with JAMS, which is probably the largest arbitrator provider in the United States, so a very well-to-do arbitration company. And it's required that within 45 days the dispute be resolved. So there's a 15-day appeal window, and then at that point there's 45 days for the arbitration to be heard and then for a ruling. And so the CSC has set up deadlines that are hopefully going to move the arbitrations along quickly because there's going to be a lot of them. This was 2 weeks ago, so remember the CSC is only 5 weeks old, and as of 2 weeks ago, so 3 weeks after their existence, they had already denied 100 deals.
Okay.
There were 100 more that were under current review, and they had 1,500 deals that were in their backlog waiting to be reviewed and appealed. So there are going to be thousands of NIL deals that will need approval by this group. So they're going to have a lot of work to do.
Okay, so what happens during that 45 days? Can the player play? Can the player get paid from the deal or not?
I think a lot of the deals get put on a pause.
Okay.
As for whether or not maybe existing deals can continue, I'm not entirely sure. But from what I know is that I guess deals that are kind of in the works are going to be paused. And I know that recently there was a revision to the guidance that came out regarding this specific portion of the settlement that allowed some of those deals to resume because they were determined to clear the NIL Go requirements and everything.
Okay, tell me what happened with that. There's litigation, correct?
There was some threat of litigation, so
Okay.
I think on July 10th, the CSC issued its...
So 10 days after
10
its existence.
They issued their first interpretation of basically the valid business purpose, and that really focused on where the money was coming from. And the stance that the CSC took on July 10th was that these boosters and collectives that have been formed in kind of in the inception of the NIL era to gather these funds, these boosters or collectives were not legitimate businesses in order to channel NIL money. And so they were really said you need to have NIL deals that are like a traditional shoe brand sponsorship. And this interpretation of the House settlement was met with some stern letters from plaintiffs' counsel threatening litigation and basically speaking to that they believed that it was an overreach and beyond the scope of the House settlement. About 10 days later, the CSC then reissued a revision of their very first ever interpretation and basically greenlit the collectives being allowed to channel NIL money in deals, but it still had to be a legitimate business purpose, but it could come from one of these collectives. And so some examples of the way that a collective could do this. As an example, I think something like in-game worn jerseys, memorabilia. Memorabilia is very popular. So these collectives could acquire some of these players in-game worn apparel and pay for it, and then also has the right to then go into the market and sell it. And so somebody could potentially be paid $500,000, whatever the fair market value is for their game-worn jersey, and the Red River Rivalry game-worn jersey. A collective can then cut a check to that player for that, and then that would be found under the current interpretation as a valid NIL because it's a valid business purchase, the merchandising of game memorabilia, and a collective again has the standing to kind of undergo that transaction with this player.
Interesting. Who owns the uniform? Because the way it's currently going on is the school issues the uniform through either Nike, Adidas, Under Armour, whoever they have their deals with. And then, they use these uniforms more than once.
Yeah, well, I thought it was interesting. That was an example that was given as a valid business person, but I did think that already you've pointed out to the first flaw in that example, so it didn't take us long.
Yeah, I think something that's really important is that they need to operate independently from direct school control. So that would be an issue, right? I mean, the jerseys are under school control if they're being used season after season for the same school.
Well, not season, but maybe more than one game.
Yeah,
right?
okay, more than one
We got
game.
an away game, you're in this color. We've got a home game, you're in this color. And maybe your name's on the back, maybe it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Your number is definitely there. Some schools have names on the back, some don't, right? So there's another issue.
Mm-hmm.
What if you're at a school where they don't put your name on the back? Is that jersey worth as much as the one that has their name on the back? You see where this is all, I mean, there's so many different things where I'm just thinking, oh boy, the equipment guy is gonna be really thrilled.
He'll probably get a cut.
I hope he does.
We're all getting a cut in the NIL world.
I hope he does, actually, those poor guys, it's a hard job. So, is there anything else you guys wanna talk about?
I just thought that it was interesting, I think what Seth mentioned about the July 24th revision to all of this guidance. It happened after negotiations took place between the CSC, the Power 5 conferences, and like you said, the plaintiff attorneys. And just to kind of think that, they have that much pull already over the CSC, which, to kind of be like, hey, like, this isn't meeting what we want, we want this. And they did it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that kind of gives some sort of idea of the direction of what this, where this might go.
Yeah, my big concern before the case settled was they had already entered into a bunch of deals. And then all of a sudden, July 1, everything's going to be reviewed. And so these deals were entered into, let's say, in February. And then they were going to be reviewed in July, but nobody knows whether they have a valid business purpose or not. And then it was those deals in between that I was very concerned about. And I think you're already telling me there's like 1,500 deals in there that they're trying to review, and then then you can appeal, and then you have 45 days. Now you're into the season. And then what if a kid is counting on that money?
Yeah, no, I think that's a valid point. I think hopefully the 45 days, if they can stay on that, then, that's that would be helpful. But we'll see. I guess, college football is right around the corner.
Right.
We'll have to see if they even make it to the college football playoff, if the CSC is still alive when we're playing for the college football championship in the beginning of next year.
You think it might not exist in January?
I think it's I think the enforceability is really interesting. That it's basically a law enforcement agency that has the authority of the handshake of 4 or 5 very powerful gentlemen, and how far can that go? It's an interesting question. I think it's almost an interesting question for our society as a whole. How much value is there still in a handshake agreement? And I think we're all going to sit and see how far the CSC can make it.
Yeah, and it's for profit. So who's paying for this?
Well, mainly the Power 5 conferences, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think everybody that's basically opted into house is chipping in for their
But
services.
even according to one of the people that I've talked to that's an AD at a school that didn't opt in, they still were going to be required to pay a certain amount of money for this CSC. Each school had to pay a certain amount because any third-party deal, even if you didn't opt in, still can go through this NIL gold thing. So it's kind of an interesting I wasn't real clear on exactly how that was going to work, right? Because they weren't real happy. We're not opting in. Why are we having to pay the money for this CSC? Because they still are enforcing the NIL rules, which even if you're a school that doesn't opt in, you still can, participate in NIL deals, right?
I wonder if that could have maybe set up something where those schools defer those payments onto the individual athletes. Maybe in every deal, maybe there's going to be a percentage, a fee that goes directly to the CSC to pay for.
Well, who's paying for the arbitration? Who's paying for the arbiter? Who's paying for the attorney that's representing the athlete? Who's paying all this? That's it's like, people aren't working for free.
The SEC.
Okay, wow.
Men's college football and the SEC is paying for most of it.
That's crazy. That's a crazy train. Okay, so is there anything else you guys want to add?
No, stay tuned. It's an interesting space. It's only 5 weeks old. So.
Yeah, but don't be. But his point, the head of the CSC was what? What's your exact line there?
Be skeptical, don't be cynical of the CSC.
And that's his exact quote.
Yeah.
So that's why we titled this particular podcast that. So just letting you know. So everybody out there who's listening to this, please share this with current student athletes, athletic directors, coaches, because I think a lot of people do not know that much about the CSC because I think it's so new. And I know you guys had to do some digging to get information, right? What did you do to get the information?
Different journalists that have touched on this in the 5 weeks that it's existed. It's really just kind of a word of mouth thing from a lot of direct quotes from the CEO, Bryan Seeley.
And then this particular organization though does have a website, is that correct?
They do. Yes.
And what is their website?
Their website, collegesportscommission.org.
Which I love. It's like they did it one night together on their website builder. He's called it a startup, and it really kind of has the startup feel to it, which is interesting. And some of the again, like the form for the dispute form is on their website, and some of their holdings, quote unquote, or their interpretation of the house settlement. Some of that information is on their website.
Okay, there you go. So that's how to get more information. But please share this episode with anybody who can be impacted by the CSC, or if you're just interested in this topic. So thanks for listening to Born to be a Sports Agent. Please subscribe, and if you have any questions, email Jill at jillbaxter@me.com. Thanks for listening.